The chandeliers trembled with music, their crystal pendants scattering firelight across silk and glass. Beneath them, the air rippled with perfume and gossip, laughter ringing like porcelain about to shatter. It was the height of the London season, and the Ravenswood ball had gathered every title worth speaking of. At the center of that glittering assembly stood a young woman whose beauty, though delicate, seemed born of sincerity rather than vanity. She was 24, graceful, earnest, the daughter of a noble family whose fortune had thinned but whose reputation still shimmered faintly in the eyes of society. Tonight was meant to secure her future. Her engagement to Viscount Ashcombe was to be announced before the orchestra and the watchful smiles of half of London. The music paused. The master of ceremonies lifted his hand, and all eyes turned toward the couple standing near the gilded staircase. She trembled slightly, her fingers clutching a fan that matched the pale blue of her gown. The Viscount's hand rested loosely upon hers, a gesture of possession more than affection. When he stepped forward, his voice carried clearly through the hush. "My friends," he said, "I owe you the truth before the night proceeds." There was something in his tone that made her heart falter. The truth, she thought, should have been a promise of devotion. Instead, it became her undoing. He spoke with the easy cruelty of a man confident in his social immunity. He spoke of irreconcilable differences, of mistaken affections. Then, as if offering her a kindness, he added, "I have found that my heart belongs elsewhere." The silence that followed was not merciful. It was suffocating. A murmur rolled through the hall, and fans fluttered like startled birds. The orchestra stood frozen, bows suspended midair. She could feel the heat rise in her cheeks, but her pride, fragile as lace, held her upright. She managed a curtsy, the mechanical gesture of a lady trained since birth to mask despair behind civility. When she turned away, the tears that had threatened her composure fell freely. The ballroom swallowed her humiliation with hungry eyes. As she passed beneath the marble archway, she heard the whispers begin, soft, cruel, multiplying. "Did you see? Poor thing. A pity she ever believed herself worthy of him." She did not stop to gather her cloak or gloves. The grand staircase blurred before her. The night beyond the doors beckoned like escape itself. London awaited, vast, indifferent, and mercifully dark. Outside, the rain had begun, a fine, relentless drizzle that blurred the gaslights into halos. Her satin slippers sank into the wet cobblestones, the hem of her gown absorbing the city's grime. Each step was a rebellion against the world she had just fled. She no longer cared who saw her, no longer cared that her hair, once arranged in careful curls, now clung damply to her temples. The cool air bit through the thin fabric, and with every breath she tasted the bitter metallic tang of humiliation. She turned down a narrow street lined with shuttered shops. The rain grew heavier, a steady rhythm that matched the quickening of her heartbeat. In her mind echoed the Viscount's words, sharp as glass. "My heart belongs elsewhere." She had built dreams upon those very words when they had once been whispered to her. How swiftly love, when withdrawn, became cruelty. Her steps slowed as the city dimmed around her. The ball's laughter was gone, only the rain spoke now. She reached a corner where a wrought iron gate loomed, its metal cold beneath her hand. She meant to steady herself, but her slippers slipped against the slick stones. Her body pitched forward, and in that instant, she collided with something solid, unyielding, and human. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. A gloved hand steadied her shoulder. Another lifted her chin just enough to meet a shadowed face. The man before her was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark cloak glistening with rain. Beneath the brim of his hat, she glimpsed a pair of eyes as pale and distant as winter sunlight. Recognition struck her breathless. The Duke of Ravensshire. Whispers of him haunted every drawing-room. A widower at 35, a soldier returned from the Peninsula Wars, a man said to have buried his heart with the wife he lost to fever. He attended no soirees, signed no invitations, and appeared tonight only at the Queen's insistence. His reserve was legend, his coldness, gospel. And yet, here he stood in the rain, holding her upright with the ease of a man rescuing someone from herself. "You should not be out here alone," he said. His voice was deep, measured, carrying neither pity nor reproach, only a simple truth. "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered, unsure if she spoke to him or to the night itself. "Then you should find shelter," he replied. "London is less forgiving than it appears from a ballroom window." She wanted to laugh at the irony. Forgiveness, she thought, was a luxury reserved for men who broke engagements, not for women who endured them. "I shall manage," she murmured, though her soaked gown clung heavily to her frame, and her lips had begun to tremble with cold. For a moment, he seemed to study her, not as a man studies beauty, but as one examines a wound too deep to treat. Then, without another word, he removed his cloak and placed it around her shoulders. The warmth startled her more than the gesture itself. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and rain. "I cannot accept this," she said, clutching it tight nonetheless. "You already have," he answered simply. The rain continued to fall between them, a curtain of silver. She sensed that behind his calm exterior lingered something unspoken, a man who had once known sorrow so profound it left him incapable of softness. Yet in that instant, she saw a flicker of something that was neither indifference nor duty. Compassion, perhaps, though even that word felt too warm for him. She gathered herself, lowering her gaze. "Thank you, Your Grace. You are kind to a stranger." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Kindness," he said, "is often mistaken for obligation. I assure you, this is neither." The words should have stung, yet they steadied her. She nodded, understanding that this man's mercy came not from affection, but from discipline, a cold courtesy shaped by solitude. Still, it was mercy all the same. He stepped back, allowing distance to reclaim propriety. "There is a carriage at the end of the street," he said. "It will take you home." She looked toward the faint outline of a coach beneath a street lamp, its wheels glistening in the rain. For a moment she hesitated, as though moving toward it might shatter the fragile spell of this strange meeting. "You need not trouble yourself further, Your Grace." His gaze did not waver. "It is no trouble. London will devour you if you let it." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, sad, resigned. "It already has." For the first time, his expression shifted, a trace of something like regret shadowing his features. He said nothing more. She turned away, the heavy cloak trailing behind her, the rain mingling with tears she no longer tried to hide. As she climbed into the waiting carriage, she looked back once. The Duke still stood where she had left him, unmoving, a dark figure against the gaslit mist. The city seemed to bend around his solitude. The door shut softly, the coachman's whip cracked, and the carriage rolled away. She pressed her hand to the cloak around her shoulders, feeling its weight, a silent proof that not all coldness was cruelty. Some hearts, she thought, only learned warmth when faced with another's ruin. Behind her, the Duke remained in the rain, watching until the carriage disappeared into the fog. His gloves were still damp from her touch, yet he did not remove them. It was as though he, too, had felt something unexpected, a reminder of the life he had long sworn never to feel again. Morning arrived veiled in fog, soft and pale, the kind that dulled the edges of the city until even London seemed uncertain of itself. The scandal, however, was sharp enough to pierce any mist. Before the bells struck noon, every salon and drawing-room had found its new obsession, the jilted daughter of a lesser noble and the cold, elusive duke who had escorted her through the rain. Tongues wagged with inventive cruelty. Some claimed she had thrown herself at him for comfort, others whispered that he had carried her into his carriage like a fallen angel. In truth, neither had spoken beyond necessity, and yet the damage was done. Reputations, once smudged, rarely came clean. The young woman sat by the hearth of her father's modest townhouse, staring at the faint curls of smoke rising from the grate. Her gown had dried overnight, but its hem bore the stubborn stains of London mud. She had not slept. The Duke's cloak, neatly folded, lay across a chair beside her, a relic of a night she wished to forget yet could not. Her father had raged when he learned of it, pacing before the window, his face red with shame and fear. "Do you have any notion what you have done?" he had cried. "Ravenshire's name will be bound to ours by every gossip in Mayfair." She had tried to explain, but truth mattered little against rumor. By afternoon, a carriage bearing the Duke's crest arrived at their door. The butler announced it in tones of alarm, as if the emblem itself carried contagion. When the Duke stepped into the modest sitting room, the air changed. Even the fire seemed to draw back, as though wary of disturbing him. He was dressed in dark riding clothes, his posture impeccably controlled. The young woman rose, her fingers tightening around her skirts, unsure whether to curtsy or flee. Her father bowed stiffly. "Your Grace," he said, voice trembling between anger and deference, "I trust there is an explanation for this visit." "There is," the Duke replied. "Your daughter left the ball last night under circumstances no gentleman should permit to pass unacknowledged. I sought only to ensure her safety. I regret that society has chosen to interpret it otherwise." The words were measured, but behind them pulsed something quieter, a weary recognition of how little truth could alter perception. Her father, however, heard only what he feared. "Regret will not restore her honor," he snapped. "If her name is to be ruined, she would have been better off alone." The Duke's eyes flicked briefly toward the young woman. She met his gaze and saw, not offense, but fatigue, an exhaustion of one who had long grown used to the smallness of human malice. "Then allow me to lessen the harm where I can," he said. "My physician keeps a residence outside the city. If she requires rest, he will see to it." The offer was practical, almost cold, yet beneath its formality lay a gesture of responsibility few would dare make. Her father hesitated, torn between pride and desperation. The young woman, however, found her voice first. "I thank you, Your Grace, but I am quite well. I will not hide as if I have committed a crime." The Duke inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgment of courage. "Then you are braver than most," he said. But bravery seldom softens society's appetite for cruelty. His visit ended as swiftly as it began. Yet the very sight of his carriage outside their door was enough to rekindle the whispers. That night, at a dinner table half empty due to rescinded invitations, she learned the depth of her exile. Friends suddenly remembered engagements elsewhere. Her mother wept quietly, her father muttered of debts that now would never be forgiven. And through it all, she sat silent, her hands folded in her lap, her heart neither angry nor ashamed but strangely calm. The world, she thought, had shown its teeth. There was no fear left in her to feed them. Days passed. Then came a letter, hand-delivered, its seal marked with the raven's higher crest. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, a single line written in firm, precise script, "For courage in the face of cruelty." Alongside it lay a slender ribbon of crimson silk. She did not understand at first. Later she would learn it had belonged to the Duke's late wife, a keepsake she had tied to the handle of her piano before the fever took her. The gift was too intimate to be accidental, too restrained to be romantic. It was, in essence, an acknowledgment, a silent alliance between two people marked by loss. But London saw only scandal. Within a week, caricatures appeared in shop windows: the cold Duke, thawed by disgrace, the fallen lady, redeemed by pity. She could not step outside without hearing laughter veiled as sympathy. Yet the ribbon remained hidden in her sleeve, a secret emblem of quiet defiance. When the invitation arrived to Lady Pembroke's garden gathering, her father forbade her to attend. "You will only invite further mockery," he said. But mockery had become her shadow. She chose instead to meet it head-on. She dressed in pale lavender, simple but elegant, and pinned the crimson ribbon at her wrist where it glowed like a wound that refused to close. The garden was awash with blossoms and false smiles. She felt the stares before she heard the whispers. Her former fiancé stood among them, smirking behind a crystal glass. "Ah," he said loudly as she approached, "the lady who mistook scandal for affection." Laughter rippled through the crowd, brittle and gleeful. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "And you, my lord," she said evenly, "mistook cowardice for honor." The laughter faltered, uncertain now, but the Viscount pressed on. "Tell me, do you mean to thank the Duke as publicly as you once thanked me?" Before she could reply, another voice cut through the air, low, deliberate, unmistakable. "The lady you mocked found courage where you lost your honor." The crowd turned. The Duke stood at the garden's edge, immaculate in black, his gaze level and unflinching. Murmurs rippled outward like wind through reeds. The Viscount's smirk vanished. "Your Grace," he stammered. "You will excuse me," the Duke interrupted, his tone neither loud nor sharp, but final. "I have business with Miss—" He paused, glancing toward her. "With the lady who remains, despite all, far more civil than you deserve." A hush settled. The Viscount bowed stiffly and retreated, his pride bleeding in silence. The Duke turned to her, extending his arm. "Shall we?" For a moment she could not move. The gesture was simple, yet its weight was immeasurable. Accepting it would confirm every whisper, and yet she saw in his expression something resolute, protective. The same man who once declared he felt nothing now stood as her shield against an entire society's derision. She laid her hand lightly upon his arm. His muscles tensed beneath the fine fabric, then relaxed, as though her touch had disarmed him. They walked through the garden together, the path narrowing between rows of white roses. No one dared follow. At the gate, he spoke softly. "They will not forgive you for defying them." "Then I will learn to live without their forgiveness," she replied. "I suspect you already have." He glanced at her then, the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, a ghost of a smile long forgotten. "Perhaps," he said, "but not without consequence." The carriage waited at the end of the lane. He offered to see her home. She hesitated, the ribbon at her wrist catching the sunlight like a pulse. "Please," he added quietly, almost a whisper, as if the single word cost him more than pride. She stepped into the carriage beside him. The garden receded behind them, and with it, the sound of a world she no longer belonged to. The air between them was heavy with everything unsaid. For the first time, she realized that the Duke's coldness was not cruelty. It was armor, forged in grief, worn until it became his skin. And as the carriage rolled into the fading light, she wondered, almost against her will, what it might take to melt the metal without breaking the man. The morning dawned pale over Ravensshire Hall, its gray stones gleaming with dew and the faintest shimmer of frost. Within, the Duke sat alone in the library, the same room where, only days ago, Arabella had stood trembling before the fire. The scent of her presence lingered still, violets and rainwater. It haunted him. He had spent years mastering indifference, yet the memory of her eyes, bright with both defiance and despair, refused to fade. The world, once so orderly in its bleak stillness, now felt fragile, as though a single breath could shatter it. When his steward entered to announce that Lady Arabella had departed Ravensshire without a word of farewell, the Duke merely inclined his head. "As expected," he said quietly, though the tremor beneath his tone betrayed him. Arabella rode away from the estate in silence, her heart a storm of confusion. The snow-dusted field seemed endless, each tree branch a frozen finger pointing back toward the man she could not forget. In London, she would be mocked. The whispers of her broken engagement and her days spent under the roof of a widowed duke would feed the gossip sheets for weeks. Yet she could not remain there, not after hearing what she was never meant to hear. The Duke, murmuring late into the night to the portrait of his late wife, begging forgiveness for feeling again. Those words had struck like lightning through her chest. She had fled before dawn, choosing the wound of absence over the agony of impossible hope. By the week's end, London was aflame with talk. The Duke of Ravensshire, once the model of cold decorum, was rumored to have harbored the disgraced daughter of Lord Pembroke. Some said he'd locked her away. Others whispered of midnight walks by the frozen lake, of laughter heard through the great hall's doors. Truth mattered little, only that scandal now bound their names like a curse. The Duke ignored it all, until one night, as he stood beside the window watching snow fall over his lonely estate, a letter arrived. Her handwriting, delicate yet firm, bore his name. He broke the seal, his chest tightening. "You once told me that pain is easier when it has purpose. If so, then I thank you, for mine has taught me to breathe again. I shall not forget Ravensshire, nor its keeper. But I must learn to exist beyond the walls of pity and protection. You gave me courage, my lord, though you never meant to." He read it twice, each line burning deeper. The Duke rose before dawn the next morning, called for his horse, and rode for London. The snow lashed at his coat, the wind biting his face, but nothing could turn him back. The ghosts of his past, of his late wife's laughter, of promises broken by death, rode beside him, urging him either to surrender or to live. By the time he reached the city, the Thames was choked with mist and the streets glittered with lamplight. Somewhere within that labyrinth of sorrow and spectacle was the woman who had taught him to feel again. He found her not in a drawing-room or under a chandelier, but at the chapel of St. Albans, the same place she had once dreamed of being wed. She stood near the altar, lighting a single candle. Her cloak was threadbare, her gloves torn, yet she looked radiant in her solitude. When she turned and saw him, her lips parted in disbelief. The Duke removed his gloves slowly, as though shedding his final defense. "Your Grace," she breathed, her voice trembling. "London will devour you for this." "Let it," he said simply. "I have lived long enough fearing the world's hunger." He stepped closer, his voice low, reverent. "You told me once that I had buried my heart with her. You were wrong, Arabella. I only misplaced it, and you helped me find it again." Tears welled in her eyes, glimmering like glass. "Do not say such things," she whispered. "We are bound by too much ruin." "Then let ruin bind us," he replied. "For I would rather be destroyed beside you than live untouched by truth." The church was silent save for the flicker of the candle. Outside, snow began to fall again, softly, like forgiveness descending from the heavens. Arabella took a trembling step forward, her hand hovering near his. When his fingers brushed hers, the world seemed to still. Every heartbeat, every unspoken word hung between them like sacred confession. In that breathless moment, the door burst open. Lord Pembroke himself stood there, his face livid, his voice echoing like thunder. "So this is where my daughter hides, in the arms of her ruin." Arabella froze, her blood draining to ice. But the Duke turned, his bearing calm, regal. "My lord," he said coolly, "your daughter is under my protection. And if London must have another scandal, then let it be a noble one." Before the older man could speak, the Duke took Arabella's hand and lowered to one knee upon the cold marble floor. Gasps rippled through the small gathering of onlookers drawn by the noise. "I once vowed never to love again," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "But vows made to ghosts cannot rule the living. Arabella Pembroke, will you allow me to begin anew, not as a duke guarding his grief, but as a man who finally dares to live?" Her breath caught, tears spilling freely. "And what of society?" she asked softly. "Let it talk," he murmured. "Let it burn." Her reply came not in words but in the quiet press of her hand to his cheek. Around them, the candles flickered as if stirred by divine breath. Lord Pembroke's fury melted into stunned silence, and when he turned away, it was not in defeat but in reluctant understanding. The world beyond the chapel doors would feast upon their names, but within that sacred place, the Duke and the disgraced lady found something greater than reputation: absolution. Later that evening, as they departed into the snow, their carriage moved slowly through the gas-lit streets. London's whispers followed them, yet inside the carriage there was only stillness, save for the soft rustle of her gown against his coat. The Duke looked toward her, eyes softened by something fragile and new. "I once thought the heart could freeze forever," he said. "You proved me wrong." Arabella smiled faintly, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then perhaps, my lord," she whispered, "winter has finally ended." Outside, the bells of St. Albans tolled, echoing through the mist. And in that sound, half mournful, half triumphant, the cold Duke of England and the woman who defied him began the slow, uncertain thaw of love reborn.